we'll try to do in this session is to focus more on the way forward, like what could be the potential, the SSR security sector reform activities that could be, or kind of linked to the cybersecurity governance. What could be the potential activity that could be implemented in future in the region? I mean, particularly in East Asia. So we'll talk about those things. So in the first part, I would like to request Bart to reflect on the way forward to strengthen the cybersecurity governance in the region. And in the second part, DCAF will reflect on from our part to see what could be the potential SSR activity that could be conducted in the region. And maybe I will also request some of the participants to reflect back on what they think could be conducted in the region as a way forward for the potential activity. So I might request some of you to reflect on your impression about the workshop. So with that, now I would like to request Bart to take the floor for his session. Bart.
Thanks, Rohit, and sorry that I'm speaking again, but I promise to be less scripted than the previous talk. So it's a bit of for me, a bit of a tryout to see, and I think that comes with a session about way forward, because that's a bit more of a brainstorming, I would suppose, and testing a number of ideas. And what I will try to do is connect one of the things I mentioned in my previous talk about the United Nations framework for responsible state behavior, and maybe connect that to typical SSR or SSG processes or best practices or activities. So let me maybe say a few words about that UN framework, and then try to link that to some SSR practices. Did you talk about that earlier in the week, by any chance?
We didn't go into specific, but we talked about the more kind of theoretical aspect of how does the cybersecurity governance looks like, the SSG principles. So we touched on that, but we didn't go into the details. So yeah.
So last week, and I encourage everyone with an interest to have a look at the UN website, and I'm happy to provide that link as well. All of the UN member states, which were part of a dialogue or a negotiation process, if you will, over the past 2 years, reached a conclusion and a consensus in what's called the UN Open-Ended Working Group on developments in ICTs in the context of international security. And it's very much about a set of global, a negotiation, and in this case, an agreement on what constitutes responsible behavior of states in the ICT environment or in cyberspace. And that framework that, as I mentioned earlier, was first agreed in 2015, which was reconfirmed this year, or last week, looks at a number of aspects. One is the acknowledgement and the recognition that international law applies to cyberspace. So in particular, the UN Charter and everything that comes with that applies in the offline world as much as it applies in the online world. The second element is a set of, and I talked about that as well, a set of 11 norms of responsible state behavior. And these are kind of voluntary and non-binding norms where the UN group or the UN General Assembly recommends states to do certain things and to refrain from certain things. So to refrain from actions in cyberspace, for instance, that would damage the critical infrastructure of another country. To not damage or to not particularly target the computer emergency response teams or the CERT or the CSERT of another nation. And so those are kind of two constraining norms, but the other the other 9 norms are really kind of encouragement. So they encourage states to be active in international collaboration, to exchange views, to share, and to collaborate, to protect the ICT environment on its own territory. So there, where you as a nation have a responsibility for the IT infrastructure, the IT content, the IT usage on your infrastructure, you have a responsibility to protect that from cybercrime, from misuse, etc. There is an obligation that should there be an incident coming from another state, that you should not just jump to a conclusion that if the IP address indicates country X, that country X is indeed deliberately and intentionally behind a potential cyber attack, and that there is kind of a due diligence process that needs to be followed. So that's the second element, the set of 11 norms. It talks about confidence building measures. I talked about that as well. So there are, and this is really much about, let's say, sharing information publicly and openly among states about norms and strategies, about threat information, exchanging points of contact, so that in case of a situation, you know who to call at both the policy level as well as at the technical level. So that's the third element. The fourth element talks about a joint global approach to capacity building. There is no country in the world that is perfect. So we all need advice and assistance from the other in order to make the global cyber environment more resilient and more secure. And all states committed to that effort and to help and provide resources, that's expertise, skills, as well as funding for that. And finally, there was an element of what they've called an institutional dialogue. The idea that there should be a regular forum where countries can talk about issues around international cybersecurity that is of their concern. Now, as I mentioned, I mean, this all looks, I think, sounds very kind of high level, and I think if you're not too much familiar with kind of diplomatic language, it looks like what the X does this actually mean. But if you really study this, you find that there are lots of hooks and links to certain expectations, to individual nations and individual countries in terms of what actually constitutes responsible state behavior, what is considered a general good practice within a country as well as between countries. So I think that provides a good, call it a window of opportunity or a capstone to talk about how in all of individual countries we become as compliant and as aligned with those norms, the application of law, confidence building measures as we can. And you see that different countries and different regions for now, because of it's a fairly still immature policy field, it's still relatively new, have focused on individual aspects of that. I mentioned earlier that in the context of the ASEAN Regional Forum, so this 27 member state forum, mostly around, I mean, in East Asia, in Southeast Asia, concentrated on confidence building measures, and in particular, cyber confidence building measures. So for instance, establishing a point of contact directory. So what would that mean in terms of a way forward for cybersecurity governance? Is that every country has an assigned policy lead for cybersecurity, that there is also an assigned technical lead for cybersecurity. And normally these sit within different organizations and have different responsibilities. A couple of years ago, the member states of ASEAN, I know none of them are represented on the call, but the ASEAN as a regional organization said, well, we subscribe in principle to all norms, and we will make an endeavor to implement as a nation all of the 11 norms. And where this comes down to, as I said in my talk, is about not to say what should be in your strategy, but the fact that you at least have a strategy, that you at least have certain capabilities to be a responsible state actor in cyberspace, so that you have a kind of a bureaucracy that looks after it, but also that you are able to either refrain or effectuate certain policy decisions. And be able to account for those decisions by, for instance, referring to these agreed norms or to your own national policy legislation or strategy. Now, I think that one of the biggest challenges, and hopefully this is something we see some progress on in the next few years, is that the whole area of cybersecurity is taken out of kind of the military signals intelligence domain into a more public domain. I think in most countries we see that cyber is very strongly within the national security arena, and which comes with lots of issues around openness, accountability, transparency, and the ability to really have this multi-stakeholder and whole-of-nation approach that we discussed in the previous session. And the first start could really be for countries to explain what is their domestic structure. As I said, the CERT, the National Cybersecurity Emergency Response Team, is a very critical agency within any cyber portfolio. Where does that sit? Does that sit within a broader organization, or is that fairly autonomous and is really solely focused on incident response? To reflect on the Australian situation, which I think is partly very problematic, is that the National CERT sits within the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, which is part of the Australian Signals Intelligence Service, which is overseen by the Department of Defence. So as long as you're friends with Australia, that should be okay. But if you have more concerns about, let's say, what a country like Australia is doing in cyberspace, you will want to have reassurances that that national CERT capability is indeed operating independently and according to certain professional standards. And that's the second point. As we see more and more countries in our region developing their cyber capabilities within the armed forces or law enforcement and within intelligence, we can't stop that. That's a fact. But I think what has been very critical in kind of the traditional security sector reform practices is that we want those organizations to behave and operate as responsible as possible. And one of the things I haven't seen and would like to see in the near future is the publication of more operational doctrines, not so much about the confidential elements, but the processes of how does a military cyber command operate? What are its roles and responsibilities? What's its mandate, etc. And the same for cybercrime units within police and within certain intelligence organizations. So more openness about the processes and procedures that they follow and the professional standards that they follow. Another element I also hinted at in the previous talk in answer to one of the questions, talking about accountability and transparency. And that's partly related to what I mentioned earlier. There is generally a clear lack of openness and transparency about what's happening by governments, but also by industry in the cyber domain. And obviously, when you look at good governance practices, you want to have more transparency and more openness because that helps to create accountability, but also that helps to improve policy decisions and improve the quality of operations and activities by government agencies, or even by industry. And as I said, I think the agreement from last week, hopefully followed up by a greater level of consensus over the next couple of months, may provide that window of opportunity for individual countries to start looking at how am I comparing to other countries, what are the things I can improve on. Not to say that you're doing bad things, because there is no blueprint, so no single country can be accused of not doing the right things. It's about how we can collectively become better, more professional, more open and transparent, and also then have a more sincere conversation about what's really required, and what are the things that might require a different or more diverse approach. And one of the things I'd be very interested to explore is that we see a tendency to be more restrictive, let's say, in the content space around cyber issues. And I think there may be an opportunity to have a debate about whether kind of content moderation and censorship is always an approach, a preferred approach, or an approach based on a lack of alternatives to reach the ultimate goal, which might not be as disturbing as we've seen in some countries in our region. So again, to have a more diverse and open dialogue about what are the key problems countries are facing, without immediately jumping to solutions that, in many cases infringe on kind of some of the core tenets of what's a safe and secure cyberspace. I hope that sets the tone a little bit, Rohit. But yeah, thanks.
No, that perfectly says what we are trying to do now. So what we'll do is we'll provide more kind of broad kind of concluding remarks in line with what Bart had just suggested. So let me put the, sorry. Just need to put the PowerPoint slide then. So as you can see, what I will try to do is I'll try to provide more kind of concluding remarks, sort of on the how we see as a DCAF as an institution see the way forward in terms of our cybersecurity governance activity in the region. Then I would request at the end to Franziska to reflect back on how the cybersecurity program has worked in the Western Balkan country and what was the lesson learned out of that. So as we have been discussing since the first day, if you look into the regional context, so East Asia as a region has witnessed the increasing emergence of cybersecurity threats. So we saw that there are increasing cyber attacks, there are indication of the cyber warfare that is happening in the region. So region is vulnerable towards the cyber threats, and they will need the further capacity to enhance their cybersecurity governance. Of course, what we also noticed was there are convergence. There are convergence and the divergence amongst the states managing cybersecurity threats at the regional level. So when I say convergence, so we saw in the presentation of Professor Hong also, so there are at the government level between the China, Japan and South Korea, there are trilateral mechanism, there are separate bilateral mechanism as well. So the states are coming together to manage the cybersecurity threats both at the national level and also at the regional levels. Of course, there are divergence as well. So there are certain issues where there are difficulties in finding the commonalities between the states on how to enhance the cyber security at the national level and also at the regional level. And we also noticed that the security institution will play and are playing the prominent role in the cyberspace operation, and we have increasingly witnessing the militarization of the cyberspace as well. So definitely the security sector actors, I mean in particular the military and the law enforcement agency, will continue to play a prominent role in the cyberspace. And we also saw that the states in the region has already enhanced or built the cyber command and the operational capabilities, and they have enhanced their effectiveness in terms of how to respond to these emerging challenges. But of course, in terms of accountability, there are something that needs to further enhanced by the states in the region. So that is the area that needs to be further reform. So that was kind of reflection of our discussion throughout this workshop. In terms of we have put together a set of recommendations, but of course these are not a set template, but these are just some of the activities that we thought could be implemented in the region. But again, these are some of the things that we like to reflect back and to get your kind of feedback as well. So it could be any, like the governments in the region, they could easily design the capacity building programs in terms of how to enhance the cybersecurity governance for the security sector actors. So the institution in the region, along with the government, they could easily design such kind of activities. And Franziska in her presentation talks about the importance of the oversight actors, although we didn't go into the detail, but there are particular role that the parliament can and should play in terms of enhancing the role that in the cybersecurity governance. So that is the area that needs to definitely further kind of reinforced. And also we noticed that there are kind of reports that has been how the media kind of structures the reports of in terms of the cybersecurity threats and how the retaliation was done. And we have seen that in number of the presentation, the role the media will play and continue to play in terms of the cybersecurity issue. So so what we need to, as a civil society actors, as a DCAF and as our partner institution, we need to strengthen the accountability mechanism for both the state and the non-state actors in the cyberspace. So this is the area that we could continue to focus throughout our engagement in the region. Also, we heard a lot about improving the public-private partnership in terms of promoting and strengthening the cybersecurity, the cybersecurity governance. But also there are a lot of international norms how to ensure the state they behave and perform their role in a more kind of responsible manner in the cyberspace. But of course, there could be a lot of regional norms also that needs to look into as well, which needs to be in line with the international norms. So in order to ensure that the state behavior is in line with the responsible act. So we have been discussing this thematic area throughout the session. And to continue to that, and we also discussed that it is important that we continue to build the capacity of security institutions and perhaps, and more importantly, the intelligence sector, so that they could quickly detect and to monitor the emergency cybersecurity threats, and that they could respond in more effective manner. So this is something they have to continually to build in all the states in the region. And we touched about the role the SOT at the national level SOT plays, and we have seen through the presentation that there are national level SOT in almost all the Asian countries. So I think if there are increasing cooperation and collaboration between the national SOT and the government agency, but also between the various institutions working on the cyber security, that will definitely help in order to enhance their institutional capacity. So that is something that should be continue to focus by the partner institution in the region. But also at the international level, we have seen there are a number of UN agencies, there are a number of UN working groups that are particularly focusing on the cybersecurity issues. And also we have seen the presentation from the ITU today. So it would be important that we continue to collaborate with the ITU, especially on designing and developing the national cybersecurity strategy. And of course, the rule of law. It would be important for our partners in the region, but also to the civil society in general, to continue to advocate for the rule of law principle, especially in the cyberspace, both at the national level, but also at the regional level. There could be a number of tailor-made programs that the partner institute or the government could design for the security institution in particular. And we discussed a lot that yesterday, how the international law and especially the international humanitarian law might play an important role in the cyber operation and the cyber warfare. So it would be important that the government in the region continue to focus on this area, designing and defining and also updating their national level legislation in line with the international law, so that they could address the emerging challenges in the cyber operation and the cyber warfare. That brings me to another point, that it is important, if there are domestic legislation on cybersecurity, it is important to reflect back on that particular legislation and ensure that these are in line with the emerging regional and international norms, especially on the how to operate in the cyber space. And we highlighted this fact, the importance of the human resources, that we need to continually build the capacity of human resources, and both in terms of technical aspect, but also their capacity in terms of drafting and implementing effective regulation which will address the good cybersecurity governance. So this is something that has been highlighted by a number of presenters. So that is an important area that the countries in the region should continue and will continue to focus. And lastly, we discussed and deliberated a lot during today's session the importance of the existing national cybersecurity strategy. And I know there are a number of countries in the region who already have the national cybersecurity strategy. So countries like Japan, South Korea, and even the China, they already have drafted their national cybersecurity strategy. But it would be important for our partners to continue to review that national cybersecurity strategy, or to kind of liaise with the stakeholders within the government or within the civil society who are kind of engaging in drafting and reviewing the national cybersecurity strategy, so that it will be updated, as we have seen through our number of presenters, that the things changes quite dramatically in the cyber space. So it is equally important that the cybersecurity strategies are updated to reflect the changing scenario. And lastly, we also heard about the difficulties of evaluating the national cybersecurity strategy during the presentation by the Giacomo from the ITU. So it will be definitely difficulties, but I think there is an area which was highlighted by Giacomo as well, where there are a set of criteria, there are a set of framework. If that could be taken into consideration, then the process of evaluation might become slightly easier. But that is something that we think the stakeholders in the region will continue to tap in, and also continue to build in on these number of areas. Again, these are some of the suggestive recommendation that we come up with based on what was discussed and what was presented throughout the workshop. And maybe I will stop there, and maybe I will request Franziska to also reflect back on how they have operated in terms of their lesson learned in terms of cybersecurity governance program in the Europe. And after that, I will request some of the participants to reflect back on the importance of cybersecurity governance in the region. Franziska, please.
Okay, thank you, Rohit. I will just simply just reiterate some of the points that you've and Bart have made, and just to put it in also in the context of my presentation on Tuesday. I think the areas, and I mean, as you said, I'm speaking really from the experience working in Europe and not knowing about the countries in the East Asia region, but I think a good starting point is something also that was mentioned by Bart, and I think by others earlier as well, is this in terms of capacity building. It sounds quite quite self-evident, but it's often maybe not done sufficiently. This real assessment of the governance structure, of the governance situation in the country before you start working on capacity building. There are a number of different approaches to assessing cybersecurity readiness in different countries, and a very well-known one and respected one is from Oxford Martin. They have a really established assessment procedure for countries, and they've done assessments in many countries in the world. And we also DCAF in our region, we have organized a number of assessments, which we always found very useful as a starting point for our work, because I think it is very important to look at the structure of different actors all together, and kind of trying to understand a little bit about who does what and how they work together. And because as I mentioned also on Tuesday, often a lot of the shortcomings, because cybersecurity is such a new field, a lot of the shortcomings are a result really of lack of cooperation and communication still amongst different actors. And there I talk about two fields. I mean, we talked a lot about this need for multi-stakeholder cooperation, which I think is definitely an issue that needs to be addressed, and it's difficult and new to many countries. But even within the government, cooperation is often not working or not clear, and therefore I think I also think it's a useful exercise to do that in the context of transparency, as Bart has also mentioned, and to see what kind of procedures there are, or if there are, any procedures at all, because I think that's often, unfortunately, still the case, that there's no procedures for cooperation and communication within government, but also with between public and private yet, and which is, I think, the starting point for successful work together in cybersecurity. So in broader terms, I spoke to you about our work on public-private cooperation, where we found that there's a lot of really good material out there giving advice on public-private cooperation in cybersecurity. But I think it is always very important to also put that in a specific country or regional context. That's why we are now publishing this guide on public-private partnerships in Western Balkans, simply because we realize there are different cultures especially cultures of cooperation, or there's different experiences, history of public-private cooperation in countries, and especially in countries where this is not such a common phenomenon yet. A lot needs to be done in preparing and building trust to even start thinking about such cooperation. What I also want to pick up on is this issue of oversight that you mentioned, because obviously oversight of the security sector, including cybersecurity, is something that's very much something that DCAF promotes as an interest of the overall democratic control of the security sector. And as I mentioned on Tuesday, it is an area though that is not really explored yet much at all, or realized in many countries. And I think there, one in most countries, and probably in your countries as well, and the starting point is actually even just awareness raising of this issue, awareness raising of parliaments on that they might have a role there to play. And that's, I think it's really a long-term process where one has to work also again within a specific country, and what kind of experience they already have in oversight of the security sector in general, and if they can kind of promote the idea that this should also extend to cybersecurity, and then think of actual ways of how to do it, because the question is not that should we do oversight of security, but also how. As I mentioned, there's this big challenge of how to oversee private actors. Also, a lot of it is linked to this problem of roles and responsibilities, because if you don't know, first of all, who has a responsibility to oversee, and or who has which role to play in cybersecurity, you don't even know that you have to oversee them. So I want to reiterate the messages from today, that working on a national cybersecurity strategy is actually a very good way of identifying the different actors and their roles and responsibilities. So I think that's a process where a country could have these discussions, and have to do this research about who are the actors, and in a more legal sense, what kind of responsibility or role do we assign them. And another point that I wanted to kind of reinforce again in this work on strategy and strategic approach to cybersecurity is also this reflection, which I think DCAF or others can contribute to, about what do we really mean by cybersecurity? What do we want cybersecurity to achieve? And we always talk about cybersecurity has to, obviously starts with the vision and everything. And as was also mentioned today, I think several times, you should maybe have a broader a broader view on this, and not just take the threats as a starting point, or some threats were identified by some people, but really look at it from the point of view who in our country, basically everybody profits from cybersecurity, but what's the kind of security would they need? And then kind of take your strategy from there. Sorry about my nose. I'm having a bad cold, and I'm very glad that we're not meeting in person, so you're not going to get any of my virus. And so I think that work on the strategies really has a central role in the whole wider process of cybersecurity capacity building. And I'm very glad that several speakers today, and also in previous days, really explained to us quite well the work of the group of government experts, or the open-ended working group, and as was mentioned today as well, that taking this, the body of international norms and guidance is still developing, but the latest report of the open-ended working group is really a good measure for also assessing, or kind of setting goals for your country in cybersecurity. And then I think in terms of working on the capacities of human resources, that I really like the message that was put forward by several speakers, that it's, you shouldn't only look at technical capacities, but also policy, or foreign policy, for example, or capacities. And one area, again, that we have worked on quite a bit, we worked a lot with the national certs, and in our experience, because you obviously hear a lot that the certs are understaffed and that they don't have enough expertise, but a good approach that we have repeated several times in Western Balkan countries is working with the certs on, and the actual teams on their internal structure, and kind of applying best practices in management to in strategic management as well, to their work, to help them also streamline a bit more their mandate, and think like with them about their capacity building training plans. And then the final area that I wanted to just briefly mention is an area that we have not worked on so much before, but I'm very interested to hear about the examples that I've heard, is this area of confidence building. And this is an area in Europe, it's the OSCE is working a lot on confidence building measures in cybersecurity. But I think that's a very important area, this interstate regional rapprochement, work of different kind of trying to prevent tensions or ease tensions, and so I think that's an area that is if you have, or as Bart has mentioned, if there's already some steps in ASEAN on this is I think it's definitely something worthwhile pursuing. These are a couple of comments. If you have any more questions on our work, let me know.
No, thank you, Franziska. Thank you. I appreciate it for your time for this. Now, maybe perhaps I would ask maybe from the participants, so to give their feedback, overall feedback on the workshop, or just to reflect back on the workshop, and also to suggest the way forward, especially in the country context, on how to improve the cybersecurity governance, or in general regarding the cybersecurity. So perhaps should I invite Professor Hong to take the floor first? Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. I really enjoy, all the wonderful presentations and comments. And then, I have 3 comments. The first one is, I really thank you for Franziska to, picking up the issue of oversight and the role of Parliament. We have been debating this issue for several years, but I'm very much worrying about that. Everything becomes easily politicized. So the pros and cons and ruling party against the opposing party. So they can hardly agree on everything. So that's why we have failed to enact legislated some cybersecurity law. So that is going to be a problem. So I don't know whether other countries have similar problems. So that's my first comment. And then secondly, when we made the national strategy, the big question is who's going to who would be in charge. So everybody is mentioning about control tower is very much important, but every department, every branch, do not like to be excluded. So they are highly competitive in getting the position, but actually we don't really find any good one. So the competition is getting higher and higher, but we don't really produce the better results. So that is still huge homework and challenge for us. And then finally, as Bart just mentioned, that cybersecurity in the past only matters to those small number of people who belong to national security sector, including military, national intelligence, or police. But these days, every students, university students, and then every citizens are all careful their individual rights, and then they are very easily hacked by someone else. So that would be kind of I don't know exactly, but it would be an opportunity for all of us, because the cybersecurity issue never belong to only small numbers. That's why I think we have to discuss about the governance and then principles and then accountability and the responsibility. So the transparency. So that's why I think we have probably I think the identified many problems, but as I just mentioned before, we haven't yet to find the strategic response yet. So that's why I think I really thank you for Rohit and DCAF to arrange this kind of meeting. So I think this is very productive meeting. So hopefully we can continue this exercise in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hong, and you have quite rightly reflect and touch on some of the important issues within the context of South Korea as well. So perhaps may I request Dr. Yojizaki to reflect back on the workshop and also what could be the way forward in the context of Japan. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. In Japan team, I see many real experts on cyber who have the wide-ranging experience in the government or the expert panels. And I'm an expert on SSR or Alliance. So my comment would be from that perspective. And 2 comments. Number one, 2 comments is about, one is the regional implications. And the second is sub-regional. Here mean that Northeast Asian focus. And the number 1 issue is regional one. And as Bart clearly mentioned, that the general principle, norms, inclusiveness, and oversights, these are very important to mitigate the concerns or manage the risk of the cyber. So that means, as to the regional contribution from Japanese side, we have kind of a principle and platform thinking about the ODA and capacity building network. And let me highlight some of the key ingredients. Number one issue is incident response capability, capacity building, by providing the hardware and software and combination of the two. That is to get the opportunity for example, ASEAN member to have a workshop and have a dialogue and try to have more preparedness as to the incidents. And this is in line with our policy to fight against the cyber crime. So from that regional perspective, Japanese policy is to provide a kind of training or program to fight against the cyber crime. So that means laws and regulations national level is quite critical and to be shared at the regional level, for example, the ASEAN level, that is very important. And that must be in line with the global norms like UN GGA. So basic principle norms should be designed to meet the criteria shared by Global One that would enhance our awareness. And that is a very important one. That's number one. Number two is, okay, a sub-regional focus. And we have experts from China, South Korea, Taiwan, Mongolia, and Japan. And many of the speakers touched on the critical issues of national security concerns, a kind of the priority possibly number one, like United States having a cyber command and many of the training, and the NATO telling manual highlights kind of alliance guided responses. That is the alliance issues. But when it's come to the reality in these regions, okay, my key findings through these three days is the CBM, confidence building measures important. That's critical. And provided by the BART and many speakers, the importance of the confidence building the measures is to mitigate the concerns and the risk reductions and promote the dialogue, sincere dialogue. And that should be definitely needed among us. That's a critical lesson we share. And I learned a lot because the CBM may be part of the European experiences, may be part of the arms control history. And now we have to think about a cyber CBM. That's a burning issue for us. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm very much inspired. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yojizaki, for your reflection. So now may I request Dr. Yuan to reflect on the workshop and also the suggested way for in the context of Taiwan. Dr. Yuan, you're muted, sorry.
Yes, first of all, I really very much enjoy these 3 days cybersecurity governance workshop, and thanks for DCAF's efforts and all the wonderful speakers for giving your insightful opinions and the knowledge to us so that we can understand for country case, for United Nations, and also for in general about the international law regarding how to properly govern the cybersecurity. So among those lectures, I think one of the takes, which just mentioned by Rohit yourself, I think the public-private partnership is one of the important things for us to, as a government sector or the security sector, which most of them are public sector, to work closely with the private sector. As I think Mr. Kaken Ho mentioned in his lecture yesterday, definitely to include the capability of the private sector so that it can be more comprehensively covered what is lacked by the public sector in terms of the governing the cybersecurity issues. For Taiwan, in terms of the the law, I think we are starting to make or legislate a proper law in order to look upon these issues, and also about the cybersecurity program. The Taiwan has established one of the very comprehensive program to cover all kind of government agencies to work closely to deal with first of all the basic infrastructure, and also regarding the national defense. For example, just like the United States, which has built Cyber Command, a cyber capability has been included under the we call EW, Electronic Warfare Command, in order to properly protect the cyber capability in Taiwan. So I think that's similar to each country's case based on their experience or actual fact that faced by both public sector and the private sectors. So I think all we know, this section has been quite successful, and from this section, and DCAF can organize maybe a follow-on section regarding the cybersecurity. I think that's definitely a good direction for us to head. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yuan, for your reflection. So maybe now I will request Jinghua Liu to reflect on the workshop and maybe say the perspective from how this could be implemented in the context of China. Yeah.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank DCAF for.
Could you increase your volume like this?
Is it clear now?
Could you speak a little bit louder? Like we can hear you, but yeah, your voice is coming. Yeah, now yeah.
It's not good technology. I need to update my technology apparently. So first of all, thank DCAF for organizing this excellent workshop. I really learned a lot from all the speakers, from their very insightful and comprehensive presentations. And also, building on what has been shared by all the speakers, I'd like to mention what's in my mind, basically 2 challenges and 2 opportunities on cybersecurity governance. The first challenge coming to my mind is actually how the political tensions are influencing the cybersecurity governance. We all know that cyberspace is a global connected domain, and the sharing of information is and sharing of best practice is a basic for the governance. However, what we are seeing right now is actually the geopolitical tensions are, let me put this way, are impeding the technological cooperation, like the previous collaboration between CERS are not as fluent as before. The sharing of expertise are always been thought of being given consideration from whether this is a like-minded country, whether this is a country of our alliance. So this political tension, I think, is really something we need to think about, and how to avoid them from influencing the collaboration in the future. The second challenge I want to mention is the militarization of cyberspace, like Rohit just mentioned. We have seen many offensive operations taken by Western countries. We have already heard a lot of accusations of what China and Russia has done. So I'm wondering, and also is some reflection nowadays being shared by a lot of scholars, that is whether the strategic analysis in the past, like stability, like transparency, escalation, are these still the right words to understand the current situation in cyberspace? And I remember one participant mentioned deterrence, whether this is a the approach that is very feasible for cyber governance. I think that's something we really need to discuss more. But that being said, I see also two opportunities. The first is the consensus just published by OEWG, the Open-Ended Working Group. I know a lot of people are actually critical of whether we need to open a new forum under United Nations, why don't we just stay with UNGGE? But it turns out that UN OEWG actually giving us a new forum that people can be more creative, and that could be the something we experience that can give us some lessons to think about our regional exchanges, not only among governments, but how to invite more different actors to contribute. I think that is also something we regional cooperation should learn from. And another opportunity I wanted to briefly mention is China is now growing up very fast in cyberspace, and cybersecurity governance has become a much more bigger issue for the government. We are doing a lot on promoting and issuing new laws like personal information protection law, data security law. A lot of laws are under discussion or are being issued. So we are very eager to understand how the other countries are doing similar things in their country and want to learn more cases. So I think that will become a big motivation for Chinese governments and also other scholars to actively collaborate with other countries. So I view it as a big chance and hope there could be more chances we can discuss. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lu, for giving your remarks, and it was quite helpful to hear about it.